Welcome back to Regenerate, the show about, I guess, reinventing not just our economy, but our culture and our society. Today, I'm really honored to have one of the great theorists of regeneration on the show. Paul Hawken is one of the world's most distinguished writers on the environment, thinkers on the environment, and he's also the author of a really, really important new book, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. Paul, welcome to Regenerate.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I'm happy to be home and regenerate.
We have an intellectual confluence, Paul, of interest in this word regenerate and regeneration. What is it about this word regenerate or regeneration that you think is so important in terms of saving the planet?
Well, first of all, I'll go backwards. The planet doesn't need to be saved. Civilization needs to be saved. And to do that, we need to honor the planet, the earth, the biosphere, etc. So I think when we talk about saving the planet, we're still in a kind of a colonial Western mindset, you know. Not that it's not true, by the way. I'm just saying it is a way of looking at object subject. You know, it's a little odd. But regenerate and regeneration are so important as concepts. As to me, they're framing and they're lenses to look at who we are, what we're doing, and the crisis in terms of climate that we confront. And we do confront a climate crisis, and that's well known. The science is good. If not good, it's impeccable, really. And but the way we have gone about, in a sense, addressing this civilizational problem is primarily by catastrophizing it. And that's good science, by the way. It's just bad neuroscience. In other words, it doesn't really work in terms of getting involvement, getting people engaged, getting people enthusiastically connected to be involved with solving the crisis itself and so forth. And I think Regenerate does, and that's why I think it's an important reframing. That most of the language around climate, as you well know, Andrew, is acronyms and their jargon and their metrics and 15C, you know, CO2e, you know, gigaton, net zero, decarbonization. Those words mean almost nothing to 99% of the people in the world. And so that conversation is very active, and it's understandable that people in climate use shorthand. Of course, doctors use it, pilots use it, of course, professionals use it. But if this is going to succeed, we need everybody involved, not just experts. And so regeneration is innate to our bodies, to being a human being, to our consciousness. It is the default mode of nature. It is what happens every single time you stop harming nature, cutting, burning, scraping, poisoning. The immediate default mode of nature is to begin regeneration. And but it's our default mode of our own body. All 30 trillion cells in your body are regenerating right now, and now, and now, and now. So we're a walking, talking bit of protoplasm that's regenerating all the time. And of course, life forms have a passage. They're born, they live, and they die. But in that process, we're always regenerating, and we do it socially, though. We do it culturally.
Do we know, Paul, though, we're doing it? Is part of your mission to educate people about how they are unavoidably and inevitably regenerative themselves?
No, my goal is to bridge the gap between addressing global warming as something that belongs to experts, or by the minimization of it by individuating the problem to a person. And when you do that, recycle, use cold water, and eat less meat, I mean, people will do that. They understand they're important. They do have impact. But at the same time, most individuals realize that that's inadequate to the task at hand. And so naturally, they turn to big corporations, big government, or international meetings such as the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow.
Or the COP26 event that's going on as we speak.
That's what I said, the Conference of the Parties.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, in Glasgow right now. And so then we look to that as being our last best chance, as that's their words, not mine. That's John Kerry's words. And we've been disappointed for 25 years, totally. And for some reason, we think we won't be disappointed this year. We will be. There'll be a terrible hangover because it doesn't really engage us. It's they. We think, oh, I hope they do it, whoever they are.
It's the catastrophe movie, in other words. We imagine we're watching it.
Yeah, and there's a big gap between the individuation of the solution and somehow we're going to have this amazing meeting in a capital city somewhere for 12 days and something magical is going to happen. That's magical thinking, and it's not very practical thinking.
I'm not sure whether you're suggesting that we need to remember ourselves or forget ourselves.
Well, whatever. That's an interesting question, because what is self? But what I'm suggesting is that that regeneration is got big arm. It's engaging. It opens up possibility. And we're drowning in probabilities. And that's what the news cycle is about what's going wrong, where, how fast, it's going wrong or faster, how dysfunctional the Conference of the Parties is in Glasgow, how the arguments are. And of course, and the news cycle just rains and pelts down on us, these problems. And they're for real. I don't argue against them. And there's a paucity of a sense of possibility. And so unless you have that counterbalance, like, got the problem, thank you, the science is extraordinary. Now, can we just focus on the solution? Let's focus on possibility. You don't need to drag that into the room every time you have a conversation, because that will kill people's involvement. When you use fear and threat and shame and blame and guilt and obligation, as a motivating idea, that's going to motivate people. My response to that is, how is that working for you? It's not working at all. And so what does work is people moving towards possibility, whether they're living, regardless of their income or their social status, or where they live, or their cultural status, or what they believe in, whether they're families, whether they're foot soldiers. We all move towards possibility, and that's what has not been happening in the climate conversation.
Or you've written and spoken throughout your life of systemic change. We're doing the same thing at the Regenerate Forum. We often begin with the soil. Is that an appropriate beginning, or perhaps is there another way to begin thinking about this systemic reform, this profound structural reform of how we live?
Well, the soil is no question the right place to begin from a life point of view. I mean, all food, all our life comes from the soil. Through plants or animals that eat the plants, and except for the oceans, which actually also comes from plants as well. And so soil is a good place to begin conceptually. I think more realistically, the place to start is food. Food, you can't disaggregate it from ag, and food and ag are 35% of global emissions, the number one sector, more than transport. And people do it 3 times a day. And not only do the food choices they make, that is what they eat and where it comes from, have a tremendous impact, but then on the other side, it has a huge impact on human well-being and health, ourselves. So there's a really intimate connection between ag and food and human well-being. And that has been, separated as if, we could eat, as we do, by the way, in the United States, ultra processed food, which is not food. It's a chemical experiment, designed by big food companies to biohack basically our taste buds, because we know that humans want salt, sugar, and fat, because those were scarce in our evolution as Homo sapiens. And so our taste buds then go dopamine forever when we eat it, and then that becomes addictive. We're always hungry because they don't satisfy, they're not nourishing. We eat more of it, we get obesity, type 2 diabetes, we get high blood pressure, then we have the pharma, I call it the sick care business in this country, which basically 20% of GDP. And it's a pharmacological wet dream is to have a drug that treats a metabolic disease, which is 70% of our disease is caused by what we eat and drink, a metabolic disease in which you have to take a pill or something for the rest of your life, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart conditions, statins, etc. That's where I would start, because it's so connected to all our sense of, we want to be well, we want to be healthy. And when we
mentally and physically, and of course those are intimately bound up together as well.
Yeah, and when we realize that our health depends on the health of the environment, right back to the health of the soil, that it's a living community instead of a dead, inert substance, which is what it's been made into by industrial ag, and that creates nutrient-dense, healthy plants. It goes on and on. I won't go down to the cascade of benefits of industrial ag right now, but or from a regenerative ag as compared to industrial ag. But so that is really at the heart and the hearth, of where we can start as people, families, as mothers and fathers, cafeterias, what our children are served at school, things we take for granted, the advertisements that are focused on our children by using Beyonce and pop singers to basically, get, millions and millions of dollars to sell our 10-year-old children on, the crack cocaine of soft drinks, Mountain Dew and Pepsi and these things. This is where we can make a really, really big impact, and our voices can be heard, because we care about our body, we care about our children, we care about our family, and obviously we do care about our environment. We're just not doing a very good job of it.
Paul, we've spent a lot of time on our show talking to regenerative farmers. I'm sure you're familiar with the work of people like Paul Saladin and his initiative in regenerative agriculture. Can it scale? You're also an entrepreneur, so you know about viable businesses. Can regenerative agriculture, smaller farms focusing on regenerative models for developing food, can it compete with large ag?
I would reverse that. It's degenerative industrial ag that can't sustain itself. It's going into the ditch. It is destroying its matrix, which is soil. Okay, it's destroying pollinators. It is destroying water quality. The runoff is destroying fisheries in the Gulf of Mexico and dead zones around the world. It is producing food that is not nutrient dense. All right, and so to me, it's the other way around, which is that road ends. That degenerative form of agriculture doesn't go very far. And it's the scaling that caused the problem, by thinking that one person and a tractor and a computer, could do 10,000 acres or 5,000 acres of a commodity crop. Why do we even have commodity crops? Most of those GMO crops of soy and corn are basically making the ingredients for ultra processed food. And so the question as to whether it can happen, the biggest food company in the world is Nestle. And 6 weeks ago, they announced their goal for the next more than 10 years. It's called Regeneration. And they are going to convert all 1 million, actually going to work with their farmers to convert all 1 million farms that are their supply chain, comprise their supply chain to regenerative agriculture, and have budgeted $1.5 billion to help those farmers, including 600,000 smallholders. That is cacao and coffee for sure, but also the big commodity producers for wheat, corn, and other cereal crops to regenerative ag. And not, they're not saying my way or the highway, do it or we don't buy from you. They're saying, let's work together, let's learn together, let's learn how we can make this transition. And they're doing it, Andrew, out of pragmatism. In other words, they've been here 150 years. They want to stick around. And they know if they don't do this, their supply chain is going to come apart. It's going to fail. And so that to me is a kind of I think some people often think, well, regeneration is sort of like a good idea, but, I have a business to run, or we have an economy to run, or we need GDP. But the idea that we can grow by destroying life and transfer basically the destruction of nature into currency, which we then spend and invest in destroying more of it, it's a dead end. And we can see that now. We couldn't see that maybe not so long ago, but more and more people are understanding that. And so we have to understand that the idea of stealing the future is just bizarre. I mean, it made us sense when there's a lot to steal, 200 years ago or 100 years ago or 50. There's not much left. And so regeneration is really a 180 pivot, which saying, can we have an economy that heals the future? Can we have practices that actually create more life instead of less life? And that is the difference between industrial agriculture and regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture creates more life from spring to fall. There's more life at the end of the day than there was at the beginning. And industrial ag is the opposite. And from spring to fall, there's less life on earth, and there's less life in the animals and the people who eat the food.
Are you suggesting then that regenerative agriculture can be pioneered by multi-billion-dollar industrial agriculture companies like Nestle?
Nestle is a multi-billion-dollar company, but it's not an agricultural company.
It's a food company.
It's a nutrition company, and they see themselves as nutrition, and so they can't. They know they're not farmers, and so the big, Corteva, Bayer, Monsanto, and Cargill, yeah, they're trying to get into regenerative ag now with dubious definitions and criteria. But it is farmers who are really creating and innovating the means to do this on all scales, not just small scale. And I would say that regenerative ag is one of the most, is an emergent technology, as opposed to, let's go back to the past. It is not. It draws wisdom from the past, no question, from indigenous people, West Africa, from Japan, Korea, China, farmers for 40 centuries. But it is really now an area, it's got more moving parts in any shiny object out of Silicon Valley. It is so complex and beautiful. And so farmers are innovating this all over the world, depending on their climate, their crop, the type of soil they have, and working to basically get in alignment with biology. Like, what an idea. And that's what regen ag is. And so Nestle knows darn well they don't know how to do it. Their farmers know how to do it. And it's for them to work with them and other consultants and experts and people like Paul and Gabe Brown and,
Gabe Brown is also someone we've talked to for the show, of
Sure.
course. There are so many important voices now, as well as your own, of course, in terms of articulating what regenerative agriculture can and should be.
Yeah, Sally Calhoun. And there's so many experts out there, and they're learning on the ground, and they're happy to share their learning with other farmers. And I think, when Regen, started to be spoken about more and more in the farm community, most farmers felt like a threat. It was like threat almost, because it was different. It's not what they learned. It's not what their colleagues did. And the biggest obstacle, I heard from Andrew, from farmers, was not actually doing it. It was actually going into the coffee shop in the morning in town.
Mm.
and the other farmers were like, "Hey, Frank, is everything okay out there?" Because they didn't glyphosate the ground. It looked messy to them, according to how they've been taught to farm. And, and the idea was that somehow that farm was failing. And at the same time, other farmers felt threatened because it was different. That's just the way it is in small towns. Now, what you've seen and what you're seeing and what I hear from the regenerative ag community around is that now the farmers are going to that farmer. They're starting to learn from each other. That's the only way farmers are going to change, by the way. It's not going to be because some people in LA, on a children's crusade and say, "Hey, we need regen ag food." It's going to change because farmers are talking to each other. They trust each other. And they are the eyes on the ground. They know what's happening. And when they see it working and other people want to share, there's no competition there. They want to share. They want to learn together. It's what Homo sapiens do. And so you're seeing a very rapid evolution in the agricultural community right now, worldwide.
And the market's the solution, Paul, is it? Is this something that can happen from below rather than from above?
It happens below, in the middle too. I mean, everywhere. In other words, we shouldn't just divide it, that way. We should go this way as well, which is the middle. Middle is small farmers, small stores. It can be larger ones. It can be supermarkets. It can be farmers markets. It can be efforts to break food apartheid, break the grip that has on communities in the big cities. It can be mothers and fathers going to the schools and saying, "Would you get rid of your damn contract with Pepsi Cola? Why should Pepsi Cola run the school's cafeteria and the vending machines? That's insane. And can we have real food?" That's Alice Waters, the founder of Chez Panisse, and 50 years working now with UC Berkeley to change every cafeteria and food service provider on campus to be directly connected to regen and organic farmers in California. So the food goes from farm to table, so to speak, but this is the Berkeley table, the university table, and you cut out the middleman and you bring back chefs and cooks into the university. You integrate it into curricula. You reinvigorate, or you invigorate even more the rural communities of small farmers, the Masimotos and other amazing organic farmers in California. And so that's what it's about, and so it's not really the top or the bottom. The top, you could say, is UC Berkeley, but that's big, and Alice is small, but it's these connections and partnerships, coming together to, with mutual benefit and understanding, that are going to change it. And that will involve big farmers, it'll involve small farmers, it'll involve everything.
Well, you mentioned Silicon Valley earlier. You're talking to me from Mill Valley, just north of Silicon Valley. I'm in San Francisco, just on the edge of Silicon Valley. Do we need a Silicon Valley style ecosystem of investors, of venture capitalists to put money into this new regenerative economy?
Actually, the money's backed up. There's more money trying to find a home in regeneration and reversing the climate crisis than there are places to put it right now. And I think that's, Andrew, I think that's due to a generational change, because wealth is transferred, generationally. And there's so much more literacy and attention and awareness, in succeeding generations than there is in the ones that have basically controlling most of the capital. And so what I see, what I hear all the time is, people trying to find a place to put the capital and the money. And so I think we're in good shape there on that sense. I think a lot of money is going to some really crazy, stupid things.
Where should the money go for people watching this, Paul, who believe in what you say, but don't know where to start? Where would you suggest people with some capital?
Well, I don't have a list. I've been asked that question so many times. I feel like I should have one. They could join the Global Impact Investing Network, GIIN, which represents, I think, $1.5 trillion worth of impact investors and investing, and join it and meet a lot of people and see the organizations that are involved, and then judge for themselves whether it makes sense for their portfolio or their money or their family fund or their savings or whatever. That's one suggestion right off the bat. The second one is really to besides GIN, there are a lot of impact investing conferences and groups that get together where there's and they happen all the time. And now, because of the need, and the money's there, and the need is there, and so there's a lot of that. Future Now is one of the conferences. Zem and Joaquin. I just see them every week. I suppose a good thing for us to do on in our website would be to actually do a set aside and say, look, we don't know, but these people do. And we think they're cool. We think they're credible. We think they're good people. I do know these people and I've known them for a long time, and they're doing really good work, and that's what they're focused on. And so you've given me an idea of what we should do in Nexus, that part of the website that really is about how to get things done.
Do we need a political wrapper to all this, Paul? There are, of course, the green movements in Europe. In the United States, the two political parties are archaic, to be polite. You're a philosopher of regeneration. We've spoken to many other philosophers for our series, Otto Scharmer, for example, Guibert de Marmot, all articulating similar systemic thoughts about the profound reform. But it seems to me that there is no political there's no political vehicle for this, or am I thinking too traditional?
No, there is no political vehicle because politics is corrupt. It's completely corrupted by money. And
so do we need to reinvent politics? Because can this happen without a formal political movement of electing parties to pull this off?
Well, we have to remember that government is the slowest mover of all. They follow, they don't lead. Governments never lead, they follow. Or they do something worse, which is to take over, dominate, destroy. We see the rise of neo-fascism in the world right now, which is very, very troubling. And it arises when people's identity is in doubt. They don't have a clear identity. They don't have a sense of purpose. They don't have a sense of meaning. They won't say that out loud, but that is exactly what's going on. And so they're very susceptible to demagoguery, to nativism, to populism, because it gives them a sense of meaning in their lives. And also gives them a sense of somebody else did it to them, that they're the victim, and that there's, and then one of the things I write about in Regeneration is the politics industry. And saying it is probably the most destructive industry in the world. Say, oh no, fossil fuels would be, or mining would be, or this or that. No, it's the politics industry, because it depends. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It depends on creating division, opposition, polarization.
And I don't think I hadn't really quite thought of it in those terms, but I don't think there's any coincidence when you watch the shows on CNN or Fox or MSNBC. They're paid for by advertising from big ag and from pharma, who are, as you suggested earlier, the core of the problem. So they're feeding quite literally off each other, these two rotten industries.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I'm just closing the curtain a little bit here. Sorry. So I'm getting out of the sun for you. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
mean the network and the intricacy of the corruption is such that we don't see it that way. You know, we don't see it as corrupt, but it is. You know, and unless you take money out of politics, people's vote doesn't count, and and taking it out of politics means the political industry itself. You know, so as long as we have a free for all where capital wins, then you're going to have a dysfunctional political system. Now, there are some elegant things that you can do, though, like Jamie Henn from 350.org is targeting the companies that advertise fossil fuels and getting other companies to pull away from those agencies, saying, we're not going to use you anymore if you keep spreading the lies of Exxon and Chevron and BP, et cetera. So there's a lot of interesting sort of guerrilla-like tactics, you know, that we can mobilize and organize to start to go at, you know, the Achilles heel, if you will, of the corporations who are very much basically the cause and source of corruption, indirectly or directly. And so I think that the way I see it is this: the climate movement, and I say that in the most amorphous sense of the word, you know, not charismatic leaders, one group. No, it's just is going to become the biggest movement on earth. And the reason for that is weather. There's no other reason. And that is we're at that inflection point where what has been a concept for so long, you know, global warming, really? I think it's nice outside. Or, oh God, I want it warmer. You know, I live in a cold place. I mean, all this, it's just a concept. And now it's becoming experiential. And either vicariously, I know somebody whose house burned down or this or that, or directly. And as it becomes experiential, everything changes much more quickly. And the tolerance for ignorance, for lies, for procrastination just disappears because people feel threatened and they feel their livelihoods are threatened. They feel their place they live, their family home, their family farm, whatever it is threatened. They actually finally get it. The penny drops. And when the penny drops like that, then you get a very interesting roller coaster, wild ride in terms of political affiliation. I don't know how it's going to work out, but I do know without question that it will become the biggest movement on earth. And, you know, here's a way to look at it. Okay, this is the hottest summer in recorded history, right? Human history, right? Got it. Most people would nod their head and agree with that, whether they read about it or experienced it, you know, yeah, it was really hot. This is the coldest summer you will experience for the rest of your life. That's very different than just a headline saying it was really hot this summer. And that is the penny that's dropping, which is, oh my God, this is for real. And it's understandable that people discounted it or put it away or shunted it away for years because they're busy. They're stressed. They have a mortgage, they have children, they're this, that, a job, whatever, of course. And it was, you know, very conceptual, very jargonized, you know. And now what you're seeing is people just get very alert and very awake and concerned about it. And so that concern surrounded COP, you know, the Conference of the Parties, you know, and was in the media. It didn't change the dysfunctional quality of that, you know, UN meeting, and so nothing will come of it of much note. But the fact is that the world is becoming aware in a way it never has been before. And I don't know how exactly it's going to manifest, but it will manifest in very, very powerful ways.
Is there an equivalent moment in history? When I listen to you, and I agree with you that this will be the largest movement we've ever seen, I think of the Reformation. 500 years ago, when everything changed. Is that equivalent in terms of how we think of ourselves and our universe?
Yes, excepting the Reformation was really, you know, I mean, you know, Martin Luther and I mean, it was a change in mindset, a way of seeing the world and so forth. Now, this is too, but it's actually a way of experiencing the world. It's actually experiential, which is very different than the Reformation. The Reformation changed people's experience, but it didn't come from experience necessarily.
Well,
And
I mean, I'm not defending the Reformation, but in a sense, the invention of books was experiential publishing. There was a technological, experiential element to the Reformation.
yeah, but it was here, it was in our minds,
Right.
yeah, it was in our minds. And so in that sense, it was similar, but it wasn't global. It wasn't, the biosphere. It wasn't the atmosphere. It wasn't water, river, food, life. It wasn't livelihood. It was an extraordinary moment. That wasn't a moment, the Reformation and so forth, but explosion of literacy and science, and no question about it. We are an explosive moment, but it's very, very different than the Reformation.
What happens if this doesn't happen, Paul?
What is it?
This profound structural change. If we don't take advantage of our regenerative moment, I mean, the subtitle of your book is Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. Maybe it's one, maybe it's two, maybe it's a long generation. But what happens if nothing changes?
Well, the subtitle "One Generation" means that within a generation, we'll be going in the right direction at the right.
Let's say that doesn't happen.
Okay, if it doesn't, then we will suffer the consequences. That's simple.
And what are the consequences?
I would say social breakdown, chaos, the basically the structures that are even now tenuously held together that that hold our economy and the social norms together will start to break down in light of impacts that cannot be mitigated by governance or by there's not enough people, not enough money, not enough police, not enough first responders to start to deal with the cascade of problems that can arise from this being the coldest summer for the rest of our lives. I mean, we know what happens when it gets hotter. We know what happens to the weather. We know we're seeing a disruption. I think the thing that's difficult for us to understand is that the rise in temperature is, we know now, is linear. That is, in a sense, a ton of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will produce a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of the increment in temperature. Okay, got that. What we don't realize is that climate is not linear. It's a self-organizing, emergent system that is ongoing every nanosecond. And so you're going to get changes that are much more pronounced than the linear increase in temperature. And what they will be, where they will be, gosh, nobody can predict, and that's one of the things that's made climate science difficult, because it could not say that this event or this heating or this drought or this torrential rainfall was caused by the warming planet. It can say now that it's amplified. It can say that. But I think people were looking for, a strict, relationship, cause and effect. And it's a complex system, but as a complex system, it's beyond our control and beyond our understanding of the ways in which it can suddenly change, reverse. We're talking about, ocean currents changing, you could have, of all things, Europe getting very cold because of the interruption of the Gulf Stream caused by this big influx of fresh water, from the melting of Greenland and the ice cap, and so when it's less saline, then that pump stops and then the temperature drops in Europe. It's happened before. So those are some of the just extraordinary kind of things that are posited or theorized by scientists, looking at the current data, looking at our geological history. But I just think that our societies and our economies are more brittle than I think we understand them to be. We think of them as solid and, really resilient. In many ways they are, but in many ways they're not.
Well, what about the generational nature of the regeneration movement? I'm struck in particular by how articulate Greta Thunberg and her friends, colleagues, contemporaries are in terms of rejecting the business as usual COP26 style event. Do you see, you've been around a while, you're one of the pioneers of the entire movement. Do you see a new impatience with young people when it comes to this?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's hard for somebody older to imagine what it's like to become a teenager in this environment and to learn, what's going on. And they asked the question, "What were you thinking?" Which is absolutely the fair question. In other words, and the I think what needs to happen though is that we have the polls from so many different areas in the world, including this country, where 70% of youth are arguably 16 to 23, 24, whatever, but 70% of them are worried, anxious, panicking, depressed.
My daughter certainly is.
Yeah. And that is a powerful force that can actually, if it can be transformed and turned into something that is constructive, and I think it can be. And I think, again, that's what regeneration is about. If you look at the solutions, 130 challenges and solutions in the website, and we haven't filled them all out yet, but we've named them certainly in Nexus. But if you look at them, Andrew, and you say, well, if you didn't understand climatology and you had no idea that it was amplifying extreme weather or even the cause of extreme weather, we would want to do every single one of them because they have so many beneficial cascading benefits, for people, for water, for health, for income, for security, for, food, and it just goes on and on and on. We would want to do every one of them. And so the idea that somehow what we can do, should do, what we can do to heal the future is somehow, different than addressing global warming is not true. It's really about, we are at the cusp or the precipice where we can choose to bring the world back to life, and which reverses global warming. And the beauty of that is it brings us back to life. It brings us as individuals, as groups, back to life. Or we can continue the way we're going, which is very fraught with, despair and depression and worry and anxiety, which is perfectly justified and understandable. But I think there's more possible there than just that.
Well, let's end on a positive note, Paul. Let's get beyond what you described as catastrophe thinking. I asked you earlier, what happens if we don't get it right? Let me reverse the question. What happens if we do get it right? There will be a generation after Greta. Greta will grow up. She will have children of her own. If we get it right, what is the future of regeneration? What is the next generation, a generation that grows up in a world of regeneration? How will this generation be different from our own?
Well, I think they'll look back at who we were now and how we thought and what we did with astonishment. Just like, do you believe that my grandfather, did this and she, and,
is it like thinking back in America at a world of slavery, perhaps? How could these people have ever lived like that?
Yeah, that's a very good analogy, which is, you did what to whom? Like, why? And you were a Christian? I mean, it's unthinkable now, you know, 1619 and the rationalization. And, I mean, you just look at it like agog. Oh, the Holocaust, what we did to Turtle Island, to the 500 cultures of indigenous people, the way they were treated, what Columbus did when Hispaniola, when he landed. I mean, you read exactly what happened there. It's mind churning. You almost want to throw up when you realize what the Spanish were doing to these extraordinarily beautiful indigenous gentle cultures. And so I think we'll look back at this time and going, oh my God, how did we survive? We barely made it. And we'll be agog at our lack of understanding of each other, of the place we live. We'll realize that, that we just fractured the connections between nature itself, and everyone will understand that the way you heal a system, a social system, an ecosystem, an immune system, is to connect more of it to itself. And you don't do that by being right. You don't do that by making others wrong. You don't do that by domination. You don't do that by ageism. You don't do it by racism. You don't do it by othering. You do that in an entirely different way that's based on compassion, understanding, listening, sympathetic, these qualities that are right now buried by our current cultural socioeconomic system.
Well, Paul Hawkins, I want to thank you. You haven't saved the world yet, but you've certainly cheered me up. And I think your wisdom for our Regenerate Forum community will be immense. Thank you so much for your book, for your thinking, for your contribution. And perhaps when we do a Regenerate Forum at some point in the future in the United States, you could participate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd be delighted and honored to participate in such a forum.